The moment I saw them together, something inside me died. But something else was born in its place, something cold, calculating, and infinitely more dangerous than the naive woman who had walked through that door 5 minutes earlier. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand just how perfectly everything fell into place, how the universe seemed to conspire to hand me the most exquisite revenge on a silver platter. My name is Sarah, and until 3 weeks ago I thought I had the perfect life. Perfect husband, or so I believed. Perfect best friend, what a joke that turned out to be. Perfect little suburban existence with our matching throw pillows and weekly dinner parties. I was so pathetically content with my picture-perfect illusion that I almost missed the signs entirely. The first crack in my carefully constructed reality came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I'd left work early with a migraine that felt like someone was driving railroad spikes through my skull. All I wanted was to get home, draw the curtains, and disappear under a blanket until the pain subsided. I used my key as quietly as possible, not wanting to disturb Mark if he was on one of his work calls. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. There was an energy in the air, a charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. I paused in the entryway, my hand still on the doorknob, listening. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A woman's laugh, soft and intimate, drifting down from upstairs. My heart started hammering against my ribs, but I told myself to stay rational. Maybe it was the TV. Maybe Mark was watching something while working from home. The laughter came again, followed by a man's voice, Mark's voice, saying something I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakable, tender, flirtatious. The way he used to talk to me when we were first dating. I should have turned around and left. Should have given them the chance to end whatever this was before I had to see it with my own eyes. But I couldn't move. I stood there in my own hallway, frozen like a deer caught in headlights, while my world began to crumble around me. The voices grew clearer as they moved around upstairs. I heard footsteps crossing the floor of our bedroom, my bedroom, with the antique dresser I'd inherited from my grandmother and the wedding photos on the nightstand. My feet carried me to the bottom of the stairs without any conscious decision on my part. "You're incredible," I heard Mark say, his voice thick with satisfaction. "I've been thinking about this all week," a woman responded, but I still couldn't make out the words. What I could hear was the breathless quality of her voice, the way it rose and fell in a rhythm I recognized, the same way I sounded after Mark and I made love. Made love. Past tense. Because whatever we'd had was clearly over, even if I was the last one to know it. I climbed the stairs one step at a time, each creak of the old wood sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house. My migraine had vanished, replaced by a crystal-clear focus that felt almost supernatural. I could hear everything, the whisper of fabric against skin, the soft sounds of movement, the intimate murmurs that should have been mine alone. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see a slice of the room that had been my sanctuary for 5 years of marriage. Mark's clothes were scattered on the floor, along with a dress I didn't recognize. A red wrap dress that was far more stylish than anything in my own closet. I pushed the door open just enough to see the bed. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me at first. Mark was lying on his back, his hair mussed, wearing nothing but a satisfied smile. Next to him, running her fingers through the hair on his chest, was Lisa. Lisa, my best friend since college, my maid of honor. The woman who had helped me pick out my wedding dress and held my hair back when I had food poisoning last Christmas. The woman I'd confided in about everything, including the little doubts I'd had about my marriage lately, the feeling that Mark and I were growing apart. She'd listened to me pour out my heart about how I was worried Mark didn't find me attractive anymore, how he seemed distracted and distant. She'd reassured me that all marriages went through rough patches. She'd told me to be patient, to give him space, to focus on being the best wife I could be. All while she was fucking him in my bed. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. The movement must have caught Mark's eye because his head turned toward the door, and his expression shifted from post-coital bliss to absolute horror in the span of a heartbeat. "Sarah?" he breathed, scrambling to sit up. Lisa's head whipped around, her face going pale as death when she saw me standing there. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. I looked at them, really looked at them, taking in every detail. The way Lisa's lipstick was smeared across her mouth. The scratch marks on Mark's shoulders that definitely hadn't been there when I left for work that morning. The guilty panic in both their eyes as they realized their secret was out. "How long?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Mark started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I wasn't asking you," I said, my gaze fixed on Lisa. "I was asking my best friend. My best friend who's been listening to me worry about my marriage while she was busy destroying it. How long, Lisa?" She pulled the sheet up to cover herself, as if modesty mattered now. "Sarah, I can explain." "How long?" The words came out sharp enough to cut glass. Lisa flinched like I'd slapped her. 3 months, she whispered. 3 months. 3 months of lies and deception. 3 months of me agonizing over what I was doing wrong in my marriage while they were carrying on behind my back. 3 months of Lisa pretending to be my friend, offering comfort and advice, all while she was the reason I needed comforting in the first place. I nodded slowly, filing that information away in the part of my brain that was already starting to plan. Because even in that moment of devastating betrayal, even as my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces, a cold voice in the back of my mind was whispering that this couldn't go unanswered. "Get out," I said to Lisa. She started to protest, reaching for her clothes, but I cut her off. "Get out now. Before I do something we'll all regret." The tone of my voice must have convinced her I was serious because she grabbed her dress and bolted for the bathroom. I heard the door slam, then the sound of frantic movement as she got dressed. Mark was staring at me with a mixture of guilt and fear that might have been satisfying if I wasn't still reeling from the shock. He started to speak again, but I turned away from him and walked to my dresser, opening the top drawer where I kept my jewelry box. "Sarah, please let me explain." "Explain what?" I asked, my back still to him as I pulled out the small velvet box that held my engagement ring. I'd taken it off earlier because my hands had been swelling from the stress headaches I'd been having lately. Now I knew why I'd been so stressed. "Explain how you've been lying to me for 3 months? Explain how you've been screwing my best friend in our bed while I've been driving myself crazy wondering what I did wrong." I turned to face him, holding up the ring box. His eyes went wide. "Sarah, don't—" I opened the box and let the ring fall to the floor. The sound it made hitting the hardwood was tiny, but it seemed to echo through the room like a thunderclap. "I want you out," I said calmly. "I want you to pack a bag and get out of my house." "Your house?" Mark's shock was giving way to anger. "This is our house, Sarah. You can't just kick me out." I smiled then, and something in my expression made him take a step back. "Actually, I can," I said, "because it's my house, Mark. The down payment came from my inheritance. The mortgage is in my name because your credit was shot when we got married, remember? So yes, I absolutely can kick you out." Lisa emerged from the bathroom then, fully dressed but looking like she'd been through a tornado. She hovered in the doorway, clearly wanting to leave but afraid to move past me. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," she started, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for this to happen. It just—" "Save it," I said without looking at her. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear anything from either of you ever again." She fled then, practically running down the stairs and out the front door. I heard her car start up and peel out of the driveway like she was escaping a crime scene, which in a way she was. Mark was getting dressed, his movements sharp and angry. "You're being ridiculous, Sarah. We need to talk about this like adults." "Adults don't fuck their spouse's best friend," I replied conversationally. "Adults don't lie and sneak around for months. Adults don't betray the people who love them." He turned to face me, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You want to know the truth? Fine. I'll give you the truth. You've been distant for months. Cold. We barely touch anymore, barely talk." Lisa made me feel alive again. She made me feel wanted. The words hit their target and I felt something twist painfully in my chest. But beneath the hurt, that cold voice was taking notes, cataloging every cruel word for future reference. "So this is my fault," I said. "I didn't say that." "You absolutely did say that. You're standing in our bedroom where I just caught you cheating on me, and you're telling me I drove you to it." I shook my head slowly. "You know what? You're right about one thing. We do need space to think about this. So pack a bag and get out. Go stay with Lisa or your brother or whoever will take in a cheating piece of shit. But don't stay here." Something in my tone must have gotten through to him because the fight went out of his posture. He looked around the room, our room, like he was seeing it for the first time. "Sarah, I don't want our marriage to end like this. Then you should have thought of that before you stuck your dick in my best friend. He flinched at the crudeness, but I was past caring about his delicate sensibilities. I watched him pack a bag with shaking hands, throwing clothes and toiletries together with no care for organization. When he was done, he stood by the door, looking like he wanted to say something else. "Don't," I warned him. "Whatever you're thinking of saying, don't. Just go." He left without another word, and I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the front door opening and closing, his car starting up and driving away. Then the house was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I walked over to where I'd dropped my engagement ring and picked it up, holding it up to the light. 5 years ago, this ring had represented everything I wanted: love, commitment, forever. Now it just looked like a piece of metal and stone, no more meaningful than a paperclip. I set it on the dresser and went downstairs to pour myself a drink. Then another. Then I sat in my living room and cried until I had no tears left. But even as I grieved for my shattered marriage and lost friendship, that cold voice in my mind was working. Planning. Because Mark and Lisa had made one crucial mistake when they decided to betray me. They'd underestimated me. The next few days passed in a blur of rage, hurt, and practical considerations. I called in sick to work, claiming the stomach flu, and spent my time alternating between crying jags and cold, methodical planning. I consulted with a divorce attorney, started the process of changing locks, and began documenting everything I could remember about Mark's behavior over the past few months. But mostly I thought about revenge. I'm not naturally a vindictive person. Before this happened, I would have described myself as forgiving, maybe even to a fault. I was the type who apologized when other people bumped into me, who gave second and third chances even when they weren't deserved. But betrayal has a way of changing you, of burning away all the soft parts and leaving only the hard core behind. And my core, it turned out, was much harder than anyone had imagined. The idea came to me on Friday night as I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about what Mark and Lisa had done in this very spot. I was scrolling through my phone, looking at old photos of happier times, when I came across a picture from last Christmas. It was from the family dinner at Mark's parents' house. There was Mark with his arm around me, both of us smiling at the camera. His mother was in the background, fussing over the turkey. His father was arguing with someone about football. And there, off to the side, was Jake. Jake, Mark's younger brother. I stared at the photo for a long time, remembering that day. Jake had just gotten back from a business trip, and he'd been telling stories that had the whole table laughing. He was different from Mark in almost every way. Where Mark was conservative and cautious, Jake was adventurous and spontaneous. Where Mark was focused on security and stability, Jake was always chasing the next big opportunity. They'd never gotten along particularly well, even as kids. Mark resented Jake's easy charm and natural confidence. Jake thought Mark was boring and uptight. There had always been an undercurrent of competition between them, the kind of rivalry that only brothers could maintain. And Jake was gorgeous. Objectively, undeniably gorgeous in a way that made women do double takes on the street. He had the same dark hair as Mark, but where Mark kept his conservatively cut, Jake's was just long enough to be tousled. He had the same green eyes, but Jake's sparkled with mischief while Mark's were serious and calculating. Jake was taller, broader, more confident in his own skin. More than that, Jake had always been kind to me. At family gatherings, when Mark would get caught up in arguments with his father or disappear into work calls, Jake would make sure I wasn't left sitting alone. He'd ask about my job, remember details from previous conversations, make me laugh with his stories. He was the kind of man who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. I'd always been careful to keep our interactions appropriate, of course. He was my brother-in-law and I was a married woman. But I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed his appeal. What woman wouldn't? Now, staring at his picture on my phone, an idea began to form. It was so perfect, so beautifully symmetrical, that I actually laughed out loud in my empty bedroom. Mark had taken my best friend. What if I took his brother? The thought should have shocked me. A week ago it would have, but the woman I'd been a week ago was gone, burned away in the fire of betrayal, and replaced by someone harder, smarter, more ruthless. This new version of me looked at the idea and saw not just revenge, but justice. I sat up in bed, my mind racing. Jake lived in the city, about 2 hours away. He worked in tech consulting, traveling frequently for business. He was single, had been for the past year, according to Mark, after a relationship with some model had ended badly. He was successful, attractive, and if I was remembering correctly, he'd always seemed to enjoy getting under Mark's skin. The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. Mark and Lisa had played me for a fool, counting on my trust and naivety to keep their secret safe. They'd expected me to be devastated, to collapse, to make things easy for them by being the victim. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I spent the weekend researching Jake online, looking through his social media profiles and LinkedIn page. He posted regularly on Instagram, photos from his travels, snapshots of his life in the city, pictures with friends at trendy restaurants and bars. He looked happy, confident, successful, exactly the kind of man who could make Mark feel inadequate just by existing. But more than that, Jake looked like he enjoyed life in a way that Mark never had. While Mark was always worried about what other people thought, always playing it safe, Jake seemed to embrace spontaneity and adventure. He was the kind of man who said yes to opportunities, who lived fully in the moment. The kind of man, I realized, that I'd always been attracted to but had never allowed myself to pursue. By Sunday evening, I had a plan. It was risky, requiring a level of manipulation and calculation that the old Sarah never would have attempted. But the old Sarah was gone, and the new one was ready to play a game that Mark and Lisa had started, but never expected me to finish. I started with research. I found out that Jake had a favorite coffee shop in the city, a little place called Grind that he posted about frequently. He seemed to go there most weekday mornings, usually around 8 a.m. based on the timestamps on his photos. It was the kind of detail that most people wouldn't notice, but I was paying attention to everything now. On Monday morning, I called in sick to work again, extending my stomach flu for another day, and drove to the city. I'd never been to Grind before, but I found it easily enough. It was exactly the kind of place I'd expected Jake to frequent. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, baristas with carefully curated beards and vintage band t-shirts. I ordered a latte and found a table near the window where I could watch the door. At 8:07 a.m., Jake walked in. He looked even better in person than he did in photos. He was wearing dark jeans and a navy button-down that brought out his eyes, his hair slightly messed from the morning wind. He moved with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to doubt yourself, never having to wonder if you're good enough. The barista clearly knew him, greeting him by name and starting his order before he'd even reached the counter. He chatted easily with her while he waited, making her laugh at something I couldn't hear from across the room. When his coffee was ready, he turned to find a seat, and his eyes met mine across the cafe. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could see the surprise in his expression, the quick calculation as he tried to figure out what I was doing there. Then his face broke into a smile and he headed toward my table. "Sarah?" He sounded genuinely pleased to see me. "What are you doing in the city?" I stood up to hug him, letting the embrace last just a heartbeat longer than it should have. He smelled like expensive cologne and morning air, warm and masculine and nothing like Mark. "Work meeting," I lied smoothly. "I was in the neighborhood and remembered you posting about this place. Thought I'd check it out. It's great, isn't it?" He gestured around the cafe. "Best coffee in the city, in my opinion. Mind if I join you?" He was already pulling out the chair across from me, and I nodded, trying to look pleased but not too eager. The first rule of seduction, I was learning, was to make the other person think it was their idea. Of course. I'd love the company. We settled into conversation easily, the way we always had at family gatherings. He asked about my work, and I found myself telling him about the marketing campaign I'd been developing for a client, something I realized I'd never really discussed with Mark, who'd always seemed bored by the details of my job. Jake, on the other hand, was genuinely interested. He asked smart questions, made insightful comments, and actually listened to my answers. It was intoxicating, having someone's full attention like that. When was the last time Mark had looked at me the way Jake was looking at me now? "You know," Jake said after I'd finished explaining a particularly complex branding strategy, "you should think about consulting. You clearly have a talent for this, and the flexibility might suit you." I felt a flutter of something that might have been attraction, or might have been the thrill of the hunt. "I've thought about it, actually. Mark always says it's too risky that I should stick with the steady paycheck." Jake's expression shifted slightly at the mention of his brother's name, becoming less warm and more guarded. Mark always was the cautious type. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. "You two still don't get along, do you?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. "We're different people. Always have been. Mark thinks I'm irresponsible. I think He trailed off. seeming to remember he was talking to Mark's wife. Boring? I supplied with a small smile. Jake looked startled, then laughed. I wasn't going to say that, but you were thinking it. Maybe a little? He studied my face carefully. You seem different today. More, I don't know. More yourself, maybe? The observation was more perceptive than I'd expected, and I felt a little thrill of recognition. He was seeing something in me that Mark never had, something that maybe I was just discovering myself. Maybe I am, I said softly. We talked for another hour, the conversation flowing effortlessly from topic to topic. Jake was funny and charming and interesting in a way that made the time fly by. When he finally glanced at his watch and grimaced, I felt genuinely disappointed. I have a client call in 20 minutes, he said apologetically. But this was really nice. I'm glad we ran into each other. Me too, I said, meaning it more than I probably should have. He stood up to leave, then paused. You know, I'm having a few people over for dinner this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just some friends from work. You and Mark should come. I felt my heart skip a beat. This was perfect, better than I could have hoped for. That sounds lovely, I said. I'll check with Mark and let you know. Great. He smiled that devastating smile again. I'll text you the details. After he left, I sat in the cafe for another 20 minutes, nursing my latte and thinking. The encounter had gone better than I'd dared to hope. Jake was clearly attracted to me. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the way he'd leaned forward when I spoke, the way he'd found excuses to extend our conversation. More than that, he seemed to genuinely like me. Not just as Mark's wife, but as myself. He'd seen something in me that even I was still discovering, some version of myself that was stronger and more confident than the woman I'd been before. It was intoxicating, and it was exactly what I needed for the next phase of my plan. I drove home with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since I'd caught Mark and Lisa together, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. I had a plan, and it was already working. Mark still hadn't come home, presumably staying with Lisa or some friend who didn't know what he'd done yet. His absence should have hurt, but instead it felt liberating. I had the house to myself, space to think and plan without having to pretend everything was normal. That evening I called Jake to thank him again for the coffee and to RSVP for Saturday night. Actually, I said, injecting just the right amount of regret into my voice, Mark can't make it. He's got some work thing he can't get out of. But I'd still love to come if that's okay. There was a brief pause, and I could practically hear Jake's mind working. A dinner party with his brother's wife, without his brother present. It should have been awkward, potentially inappropriate. Instead, he sounded pleased. Of course that's okay. I'd be disappointed if you didn't come. We talked for a few more minutes about the dinner, about his work, about nothing in particular. But beneath the surface conversation, I could feel something else, a current of awareness, of possibility. He was interested, more than interested. After we hung up, I sat in my living room and smiled for the first time in days. Saturday was 5 days away. 5 days to prepare, to plan, to become the woman Jake clearly thought I could be. 5 days to set my revenge in motion. I spent those 5 days transforming myself inside and out. I went shopping for new clothes. Not the conservative, practical pieces I usually chose, but things that were sophisticated and feminine and showed off the figure I'd been hiding under loose sweaters and shapeless dresses. I got my hair cut and styled, traded my sensible flats for heels that made my legs look miles long. But the real transformation was internal. I practiced being the woman I'd been with Jake at the cafe, confident, interesting, worth pursuing. I read articles he'd shared on social media so I could discuss them intelligently. I researched his work, his interests, his world. Most importantly, I practiced being someone who wasn't Mark's wife. Someone who existed independently, who had her own thoughts and opinions and desires. It was harder than it should have been. I'd defined myself in relation to Mark for so long that I'd almost forgotten who I was without him. But she was still there, buried under years of compromises and concessions. And she was angry enough to do what needed to be done. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of day that made you want to stay inside with a good book and a cup of tea. Instead, I spent an hour getting ready, choosing my outfit carefully and applying my makeup with the precision of a surgeon. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me was beautiful, confident, dangerous. She looked like the kind of woman who could seduce her brother-in-law without breaking a sweat. The kind of woman who could destroy a man's world and enjoy every minute of it. She looked like someone who could give Mark and Lisa exactly what they deserved. Jake's apartment was in a converted warehouse in the trendy part of downtown, all exposed beams and industrial fixtures softened with expensive furniture and carefully chosen art. It was exactly what I'd expected. Stylish, masculine, successful. The kind of place Mark always said he wanted but never had the courage to choose. When Jake opened the door, his reaction to my transformation was everything I'd hoped for. His eyes widened slightly, and I watched him take in the changes, the new haircut, the fitted dress, the confidence I was projecting like armor. "Wow," he said softly. "You look incredible." "Thank you," I replied, letting my smile linger just a beat too long. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He was wearing charcoal slacks and a white button-down that fit him perfectly, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He looked relaxed and comfortable in his own space, and I felt that familiar flutter of attraction mixed with anticipation. The dinner party was small, just 6 people including Jake and myself. His friends were interesting, successful people who worked in tech and finance and creative industries. They were the kind of people who traveled frequently, who had strong opinions about wine and restaurants, who seemed to effortlessly balance work and play. They were nothing like Mark's friends, who mostly talked about their mortgages and their kids' soccer games. I found myself falling easily into conversation with them, discovering that I had more to say than I'd realized. Without Mark there to interrupt or redirect the conversation back to himself, I was free to be witty and engaging and interesting. Jake's friends clearly liked me, and I could see him watching me with growing appreciation throughout the evening. "You're full of surprises," he said quietly when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen while he was opening another bottle of wine. "Am I?" I moved closer to him, ostensibly to help with the wine glasses, but really just to be near him. I could smell his cologne again, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Definitely." He looked down at me, and I could see the desire in his eyes, carefully banked but unmistakable. "I always thought Mark was lucky to have you, but I never realized just how lucky. It was the perfect opening and I took it." "Mark doesn't seem to think he's lucky anymore," I said softly, letting just a hint of vulnerability creep into my voice. Jake's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "What do you mean?" I looked away, as if the admission was painful. "We've been having some problems lately. He's been distant. I keep wondering if there's someone else." It wasn't technically a lie. There was someone else. I just wasn't wondering about it anymore. Jake set down the wine bottle and turned to face me fully. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I had no idea." "It's not your fault," I said quickly. "I shouldn't have said anything. It's not fair to put you in the middle of whatever's happening between Mark and me." "Hey." He reached out and touched my arm gently. "You're not putting me in the middle of anything. And for what it's worth, if Mark is being distant, he's an idiot." The touch sent electricity shooting through me, and I looked up to meet his eyes. The kitchen suddenly felt very small, very warm. The sounds of conversation from the living room seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in our own bubble of tension and possibility. "Jake," I whispered, not trusting my voice to stay steady. He was leaning closer, his hand still on my arm. I could see the exact moment when his carefully maintained self-control began to crack, when the attraction that had been simmering between us all evening finally boiled over. "We should get back to your guests," I said softly, but I made no move to step away. "In a minute," he murmured, his voice rough with desire. The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first. A soft brush of lips that could have been dismissed as a friendly gesture if anyone had walked in. But then I responded, rising up on my toes to press closer to him, and it became something else entirely. It became a promise, a declaration. The first shot fired in a war that Mark didn't even know had started. Jake pulled back after a moment, his breathing unsteady. "Sarah, Don't," I said quickly. "Don't apologize. Please." He searched my face, looking for some sign of what I was thinking, what I wanted. What he saw there must have reassured him because his hand came up to cup my cheek. "This is complicated," he said quietly. "I know." I leaned into his touch, letting my eyes flutter closed for just a moment. "But I can't stop thinking about what you said. About Mark being lucky to have me. What if he doesn't want to be lucky anymore?" It was the perfect thing to say, I realized. It positioned me as the victim, Mark as the villain, and Jake as the potential hero. It gave him permission to want me while still feeling like he was doing the right thing. Men, I was learning, were surprisingly easy to manipulate when you understood what they needed to tell themselves. "If Mark doesn't appreciate you," Jake said, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone, "then he really is an idiot." The sound of laughter from the living room broke the spell, and we stepped apart reluctantly. Jake grabbed the wine and glasses, and I followed him back to the party, but something fundamental had changed between us. Every glance, every accidental touch was charged with new meaning. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of anticipation. I was charming to his friends, witty and engaging and perfectly appropriate, but underneath the surface, I was hyper-aware of Jake's every movement, every look. When our eyes met across the room, I could see the same awareness in his gaze. When the other guests finally left, Jake and I found ourselves alone in his apartment, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. "I should go," I said, making no move to leave. "You should," he agreed, but he was walking toward me as he said it. "This is wrong," I whispered as he reached for me. "I know," he said, and then he was kissing me again, and nothing else mattered. This time there was no hesitation, no gentle exploration. This was hunger and desire and months of suppressed attraction finally set free. I kissed him back with everything I had, pouring all my rage and hurt and need for revenge into the connection between us. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "Come to bed with me," Jake said, his voice rough with want. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was beautiful and kind in everything Mark wasn't. Under different circumstances, I might have genuinely fallen for him. Even now, there was something real underneath the calculated seduction, something that responded to his kindness and strength. But that made it better, not worse. Because when Mark found out about this, and he would find out, it would hurt more knowing that I'd found something with Jake that I'd never had with him. "Yes," I said simply. Jake's bedroom was as stylish as the rest of his apartment, all clean lines and expensive furniture. But I barely noticed the decor because he was kissing me again, his hands skimming over my body with a reverence that made my knees weak. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against my neck, and I could hear the awe in his voice. When was the last time Mark had called me beautiful? When was the last time he'd touched me like I was precious, like I was something to be treasured? I pushed the thought away and focused on Jake, on the way he was making me feel, desired, wanted, worthy of passion and attention and care. We made love slowly, tenderly, with a connection that felt surprisingly real despite the circumstances that had brought us together. Jake was attentive and generous, focused entirely on my pleasure in a way that made me feel like the center of his universe. Afterward, we lay tangled together in his sheets, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal. "I don't want you to go home to him," Jake said quietly, his fingers combing through my hair. "I have to," I replied, though the thought of facing Mark after what I'd just done was both thrilling and terrifying. "Do you?" He shifted so he could look at me. "Sarah, what happened tonight? It wasn't just physical for me. I've been attracted to you for years, but tonight I realized it's more than that. I care about you. More than I should, probably." The sincerity in his voice made something twist in my chest. This was supposed to be about revenge, about hurting Mark the way he'd hurt me. But Jake was looking at me like I was something precious, something worth fighting for. "Jake?" I started, not sure what I was going to say. "I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know this is my brother we're talking about. But if he's not treating you right, if he's taking you for granted..." He cupped my face in his hands. "You deserve better than that, Sarah. You deserve to be with someone who sees how incredible you are." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and for a moment I almost told him everything. About Mark and Lisa, about the betrayal, about the revenge I was planning. But that would ruin everything, and I was too close to my goal to stop now. Instead, I kissed him softly. "I should go," I said again. This time, he didn't try to stop me. He watched me get dressed with hungry eyes, and when I was ready to leave, he pulled me close for one more kiss. "This isn't over," he said against my lips. "No," I agreed, meaning it in ways he couldn't imagine. "It's not." I drove home through the quiet streets, my body still humming with satisfaction, and my mind already working on the next phase of my plan. I'd seduced Jake just as I'd intended, but it had been more than that. There had been real connection, real chemistry, which made what I was about to do even more perfect. Because Mark wasn't just going to lose his wife to another man. He was going to lose her to his brother, the brother who had always overshadowed him, who had always been everything Mark wasn't. And Jake wasn't going to be a casual fling or a rebound. He was going to be the love of my life, the man who saw my worth when Mark had thrown it away. At least that's how the story would go. The house was still empty when I got home, Mark apparently still hiding out somewhere rather than facing the consequences of his actions. I walked through the rooms that had been my prison for 5 years, seeing them with new eyes. Tomorrow, I would start the process of rebuilding my life. But tonight, I was going to savor my victory. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room, thinking about Jake's hands on my skin, his whispered words of desire and affection, thinking about how Mark would react when he found out, thinking about Lisa's face when she realized that I'd moved on with someone infinitely better than either of them. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake, thinking about you. Tonight was incredible. I smiled and typed back, it was. Thank you for making me feel beautiful again. The response came quickly, you are beautiful. Inside and out. Mark is an idiot if he can't see that. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling something I hadn't expected. Guilt. Not for cheating on Mark, but for using Jake's genuine feelings for my own ends. He was a good man, and he deserved better than being a pawn in my revenge scheme. But then I thought about Mark and Lisa in my bed, about the 3 months of lies and betrayal, about the way they'd both looked at me with pity and guilt when I'd caught them. They'd made their choices, now I was making mine. I typed back, I can't stop thinking about you. It was true in its way. I couldn't stop thinking about any of it. The plan, the execution, the beautiful symmetry of taking Mark's brother the way he'd taken my best friend. The only difference was, I was going to do it better. I was going to make Jake fall completely, hopelessly in love with me. And then, when the time was right, I was going to run away with him, leaving Mark with nothing but the knowledge that he'd lost everything because of his own choices. It was going to be perfect. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I began what anyone looking from the outside would call an affair. We met for coffee, for lunch, for long walks in the city. He took me to art galleries and bookstores and little restaurants tucked away in neighborhoods I'd never explored. He introduced me to his world, sophisticated, cultured, full of possibility. More than that, he introduced me to a version of myself I'd never known existed. With him, I was witty and confident and alive. I had opinions about art and literature and politics. I could hold my own in conversations about business and travel and life. I was interesting, desirable, worthy of attention and respect. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Because the more time I spent with Jake, the more I realized that what I felt for him was becoming real. What had started as calculated seduction was morphing into something genuine, something that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the way he made me feel when I was with him. He made me feel like I was enough, like I was more than enough. Mark, meanwhile, had finally come home. We'd had one terrible fight where he'd accused me of being unreasonable, of not being willing to work on our marriage. I'd listened to him with the cold detachment of someone who'd already moved on, who was just going through the motions. I think we should try counseling, he'd said, as if the idea had just occurred to him, as if he hadn't been fucking my best friend for 3 months. I think we should get divorced, I'd replied calmly. The shock on his face had been almost comical. Sarah, come on. We can work through this. What Lisa and I did was wrong, but it's over. I choose you. I choose our marriage. You chose Lisa, I'd pointed out. For 3 months, you chose Lisa. Every time you lied to me, every time you snuck around behind my back, every time you looked me in the eye and told me everything was fine while you were planning your next encounter with her, you chose Lisa. That's not fair. Fair? I'd laughed, and the sound had been sharp enough to cut. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to betray our marriage vows? Was it fair to humiliate me with my own best friend? Was it fair to let me blame myself for the problems in our marriage when you were the one causing them? He'd tried to argue, to explain, to justify, but I was done listening. I'd already hired a divorce attorney, already started the paperwork. Mark could grovel all he wanted, it was too late. What he didn't know was that it was too late for other reasons as well. Because every day I spent with Jake, I fell a little deeper. And every day that passed brought me closer to the moment when I would have to choose between my carefully planned revenge and something that was starting to feel suspiciously like love. The decision, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. I was having dinner with Jake at a little Italian place in his neighborhood, listening to him tell a story about a disastrous client presentation, when my phone rang. Mark's name appeared on the screen, and I silenced it without a second thought. "Everything okay?" Jake asked. "It's fine," I said. "Just Mark." Jake's expression grew serious. "Sarah, I know this situation is complicated. I know you're still married, and I know I'm his brother. but I need you to know that what I feel for you, it's not casual. It's not just physical. I'm falling in love with you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on my plan, on the revenge, on the perfect symmetry of it all, that I'd somehow missed the moment when Jake's feelings had become real. When mine had become real? "Jake," I whispered. "I know you need time," he said quickly. "I know you have decisions to make, but I needed you to know where I stand. I'm not just playing around here, Sarah. If you leave Mark, if you choose to be with me, I'm all in. Completely." I looked at him across the table, this beautiful, kind, genuine man who was offering me everything I'd ever wanted, and realized that my revenge had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Not because I'd hurt Mark, but because I'd found something real. "I love you too," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. The smile that spread across Jake's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He reached for my hand across the table, threading our fingers together. "So what do we do now?" he asked. I thought about Mark, alone in our house, probably wondering where I was and who I was with. I thought about Lisa, who'd been calling and texting incessantly since that first day, trying to apologize and explain. I thought about the life I'd built with Mark, the years I'd invested in a marriage that had been built on lies. Then I looked at Jake, at the love and hope and possibility in his eyes, and made my choice. "Now," I said, "I tell my husband that I'm leaving him for his brother." And for the first time in weeks, when I smiled, it had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with joy. The conversation with Mark happened 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening that started ordinary and ended with the complete destruction of everything he thought he knew about his life. I'd spent those 3 days planning exactly what I would say and how I would say it. I'd rehearsed the words in my head until they felt like a script, each line carefully crafted for maximum impact. But when the moment came, when Mark was sitting across from me at our kitchen table with a hopeful expression on his face, thinking we were finally going to have the reconciliation conversation he'd been pushing for, all my careful planning went out the window. Instead, I found myself speaking from the heart, or at least from the cold, calculating organ that had replaced my heart over the past month. "I'm leaving you," I said without preamble, before he could launch into another speech about how we could work things out. Mark blinked, clearly caught off guard by my directness. "Sarah, I know you're still angry, but—" "I'm not angry anymore," I interrupted and realized with surprise that it was true. The rage that had sustained me for weeks, that had driven me to plan and execute my revenge, had burned itself out somewhere along the way. What remained was something cleaner, sharper. Resolve. "I'm done, but we can fix this," Mark insisted, leaning forward in his chair. "I know I made a mistake with Lisa, but it's over. I ended it." "I chose you?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "You ended it because you got caught, Mark, not because you suddenly developed a conscience. That's not—" He stopped, ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Okay, maybe that's true. But I realize now what I almost lost. I realize how stupid I was." "You did lose it," I said calmly. "You lost me the moment you decided to fuck my best friend in our bed." He flinched at the crudeness, just like he had that first day. Mark had always been squeamish about direct language, preferring euphemisms and polite circumlocutions, even in our most intimate moments. It was one of many things about him that had started to irritate me, though I'd never admitted it to myself before. "I know I hurt you," he said, his voice taking on the pleading tone I'd become familiar with over the past few weeks. "But people make mistakes, Sarah. People do stupid things and then regret them. That's what forgiveness is for." "Forgiveness is for accidents," I replied, "for momentary lapses in judgment. What you did was calculated, Mark. You made the choice to betray me every single day for 3 months. That's not a mistake, that's a pattern. So what, we just throw away 5 years of marriage? Everything we built together?" The question hung in the air between us, and I found myself really considering it for the first time in weeks. What had we built together? A house that was technically mine, a routine that had grown increasingly hollow, a relationship where I'd shrunk myself smaller and smaller to accommodate his needs and preferences. "What exactly did we build, Mark?" I asked. "A marriage where you were so unsatisfied that you had to find excitement elsewhere? A partnership where I was so boring that you preferred my best friend's company to mine? That's not fair." "It's completely fair." I stood up from the table, suddenly needing to move, to pace. "You want to know what I've realized over the past month? I've realized that I wasn't happy either. I was just too scared to admit it." Mark looked genuinely shocked by this revelation. "What are you talking about? We were happy." We had a good life. We had a safe life. I corrected. We had a predictable life. But happy? I shook my head. When was the last time you and I had a real conversation, Mark? When was the last time you asked me about my dreams, my goals, what I wanted out of life? When was the last time you made me laugh, or surprised me, or made me feel like I was the most important person in your world? He was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I don't understand where this is coming from. It's coming from the fact that I spent 3 months watching you be excited about someone else, I said. I spent 3 months seeing you sneak around and lie and put energy into a relationship that wasn't ours. And you know what the worst part was? What? You were more alive during those 3 months than you'd been in years of our marriage. You had a spring in your step, you smiled more, you seemed genuinely happy, just not with me. The words hit their target, and I watched Mark's face crumble as the truth of them sank in. Sarah, It's okay, I said, and meant it. I'm not angry about that anymore. I'm actually grateful. Grateful? He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Grateful that you showed me what I was missing. Grateful that you forced me to take a hard look at what my life had become. I paused, gathering my courage for the next part. And grateful that your betrayal freed me to find something better. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Mark's mind working, trying to process what I'd just said, trying to understand the implications. Something better? He repeated slowly. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward for weeks. The moment when I would deliver the final blow, the perfect revenge that would destroy him the way he'd destroyed me. But standing there in our kitchen, looking at Mark's confused and hurt expression, I realized that revenge wasn't what was driving me anymore. What was driving me was honesty, the first real honesty there had been in our relationship in years. I'm in love with someone else, I said simply. The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He actually recoiled, his chair scraping against the floor as he pushed back from the table. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. I'm in love with someone else, I repeated, my voice steady and clear. Someone who sees me, who values me, who makes me feel alive in a way I never felt with you. Who? Mark's voice was raw with shock and betrayal, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction that he was finally experiencing what I'd felt that day I'd caught him with Lisa. Someone who's been kind to me for years, who's always treated me with respect and interest. Someone who makes me laugh and challenges me and makes me want to be the best version of myself. Who, Sarah? Mark's voice was louder now, more demanding. I took a deep breath. Jake. The name hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. I watched Mark's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror as the implications hit him. Jake, he repeated numbly. My brother Jake. Yes. He struggled to form the words. You're having an affair with my brother. I'm leaving you for your brother, I corrected. There's a difference. Mark shot to his feet so fast his chair toppled over backward. You bitch, he snarled, his face flushing red with rage. You conniving, vindictive bitch. I'd expected anger, but the venom in his voice still surprised me. This was a side of Mark I'd rarely seen, the mask slipping to reveal something uglier underneath. You did this to get back at me, he continued, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You seduced my brother to hurt me. No, I said calmly, though my heart was racing. I fell in love with your brother because he's everything you're not. The words were cruel, designed to cut deep, and they hit their mark. Mark's face went white, then red again. How long? He demanded. How long what? How long have you been fucking my brother behind my back? The crude language sounded wrong coming from Mark's mouth, but I could see he was trying to hurt me the way I'd hurt him. It didn't work. I was beyond being hurt by Mark's words. A few weeks, I said honestly. Jesus Christ, Sarah. A few weeks? I made one mistake. One mistake? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. Mark, you had a 3-month affair with my best friend. You lied to me every single day. You made me question my own sanity, made me think I was the problem in our marriage. That wasn't one mistake. That was a systematic betrayal of everything our relationship was supposed to mean. So you decided to destroy my family? His voice was shaking with rage now. You decided to turn my brother against me? I didn't turn Jake against you, I said. If anything, he's been incredibly conflicted about this because he loves you. Despite everything, despite how you've always treated him like he was less than you, he still cares about you. Then why? Because he cares about me more. The words came out quiet but deadly. Because when he had to choose between his brother's feelings and his own heart, he chose love, something you never understood how to do. Mark stared at me for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less venomous. "You planned this," he said. "You planned all of this. The divorce, seducing Jake. It's all been some elaborate revenge scheme." He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't entirely right either. "It started as revenge," I admitted. "I won't lie about that. When I first realized what you and Lisa had done, I wanted to hurt you the way you'd hurt me. But somewhere along the way it became real. What I feel for Jake, what he feels for me, that's not revenge, Mark. That's love." "Bullshit." Mark spat. "You're using him to get back at me, and you're using some twisted logic to justify it to yourself. Believe whatever you need to believe," I said with a shrug. "It doesn't change anything. Like hell it doesn't." Mark's voice was getting louder again, more desperate. "You think Jake actually loves you? You think this is going to last? He's going to realize what you really are eventually, a manipulative, vindictive woman who destroyed his relationship with his family to satisfy her own petty need for revenge." The words stung because there was just enough truth in them to hurt, but I'd come too far to back down now. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he'll realize that I'm a woman who deserves better than being cheated on and lied to. Maybe he'll realize that I'm someone worth fighting for, worth choosing over family loyalty. Maybe he already has." Mark looked like I'd slapped him. "Sarah, please, don't do this. Don't throw away everything we had for some fantasy relationship with my brother." "I'm not throwing away anything," I said firmly. "You already destroyed what we had. I'm just refusing to pretend the pieces can be put back together. We can fix this," Mark said desperately. "We can go to counseling, we can work through it. But if you do this, if you leave me for Jake, there's no coming back from that." "I know." I picked up my purse from the counter, checking to make sure I had my keys. "I don't want to come back from it." "Where are you going?" The panic in Mark's voice was obvious now. "To pack," I said simply. "I'm moving in with Jake." "Tonight?" "Tonight." Mark followed me upstairs, still pleading, still trying to find some angle that would change my mind. I ignored him and methodically began packing my clothes into suitcases, taking only what I truly needed. Let him keep the rest, the life we'd built together, the house that had become a prison, the memories that were tainted now with betrayal and lies. "Sarah, please," Mark said as I folded my favorite sweater into the suitcase. "Think about what you're doing. Think about what this will do to my family." I paused in my packing to look at him. "What about what you did to my family, Mark? Lisa was my sister in every way that mattered. You destroyed that relationship just as surely as you destroyed our marriage." "That's different." "It's exactly the same." I went back to packing, my movements efficient and purposeful. "You made a choice to prioritize your own desires over the people who loved you. Now I'm making the same choice. This will kill my parents," Mark said quietly. That gave me pause. Mark's parents had always been kind to me, welcoming me into their family with open arms. They didn't deserve to be hurt by this. But then I thought about how they'd react when they learned what Mark had done, how he'd betrayed his marriage vows with his wife's best friend. They'd be disappointed in him, maybe even ashamed. At least my relationship with Jake was honest, even if the circumstances were complicated. "Your parents will understand eventually," I said. "They'll see that Jake and I make each other happy. They'll see that their son chose love over loyalty, and they'll respect him for it." "And me?" Mark's voice was small now, defeated. "What about me?" I stopped packing and turned to face him fully. For a moment, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the boy I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The boy who'd been uncertain and insecure, who'd needed constant reassurance that he was worthy of love. Maybe that had been the problem all along. Mark had never believed he deserved love, so he'd sabotaged it when he had it. He'd pushed me away with his indifference and then sought validation from someone new, someone who didn't know all his flaws and insecurities. "I hope you figure out what you really want," I said honestly. "I hope you learn to be happy without needing to tear other people down to build yourself up. I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved." The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, rolling down Mark's cheeks. "I love you the way you deserve to be loved." "No," I said gently. "You love me the way you know how to love. But it's not enough." It was never enough, and I was just too scared to admit it. I zipped up the suitcase and lifted it off the bed. Mark made no move to help me, just stood there watching as I gathered the pieces of my life that I wanted to take with me. "This is it then?" he asked as I headed for the door. "This is it, Sarah." His voice stopped me at the top of the stairs. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For Lisa. For the lying, for not being the husband you needed me to be. I turned back to look at him one more time. I know you are. But sorry doesn't fix everything, Mark. Sometimes sorry just means it's time to let go. I left him standing in our bedroom, his bedroom now, and walked down the stairs for the last time as his wife. I didn't look back. Jake was waiting for me when I arrived at his apartment, as if he'd somehow known this was the night everything would change. He helped me carry my suitcases inside without asking any questions, just wrapped me in his arms and held me while I finally let myself cry. Not for Mark, not for our marriage, but for the woman I'd been who had settled for so little for so long. I cried for the years I'd wasted being someone else's version of who I should be, for the dreams I'd deferred and the parts of myself I'd sacrificed in the name of being a good wife. How did it go? Jake asked when the tears finally stopped. It's done, I said simply. He pulled back to look at me, searching my face for any sign of doubt or regret. Any second thoughts? I thought about it honestly, giving myself permission to feel whatever came up. Was I sad that my marriage was over? Yes. Was I scared about starting over at 32 with a man who was technically my ex-brother-in-law? Absolutely. Did I regret my choice? No, I said firmly. No second thoughts. Jake's smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Good, he said, and kissed me with a passion that made my knees weak. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of practical arrangements and emotional upheaval. I filed for divorce, using Mark's affair as grounds and making it clear that I wouldn't be seeking alimony. I wanted a clean break, not ongoing ties to a man who had betrayed me so thoroughly. Mark, to his credit, didn't contest the divorce or try to make things difficult. Maybe he was still hoping I'd change my mind, or maybe he was just tired of fighting a battle he'd already lost. Either way, the process moved quickly, helped along by the fact that we had a prenup and most of our assets were clearly separated. The hardest part was dealing with the fallout from our families and friends. Mark's parents were devastated, caught between loyalty to their son and genuine affection for me. They struggled to understand how their family had imploded so completely, how both their sons had ended up on opposite sides of such a painful situation. Jake handled their disappointment with more grace than I would have expected, never once throwing Mark under the bus or trying to justify our relationship by detailing Mark's betrayal. He simply told them that he'd fallen in love with me, that he knew the situation was complicated, but that he hoped they could find a way to accept our happiness. My own parents were more supportive, but equally confused. They'd liked Mark, had considered him a good husband and provider, and they struggled to understand why I was leaving him for his brother. I told them about the affair eventually, not because I wanted to trash Mark's reputation, but because I needed them to understand that my marriage had been over long before Jake and I got together. The friends were the worst part. Our social circle had been built around couple friendships, and most people didn't know how to handle the awkwardness of the situation. Some sided with Mark, convinced that I was having some kind of breakdown and would come to my senses eventually. Others seemed to treat the whole thing like entertainment, hungry for details and drama. A few, the real friends, saw past the scandal to the truth underneath. They saw that I was happier than I'd been in years, more vibrant and alive than they'd ever seen me. They saw that Jake and I fit together in a way that Mark and I never had, that we brought out the best in each other instead of just coexisting in comfortable mediocrity. But it was Lisa's reaction that surprised me the most. She showed up at Jake's apartment one evening about a month after I'd left Mark, looking haggard and desperate. Jake answered the door while I was in the kitchen making dinner, and I heard her voice in the hallway, pleading with him to let her see me. "Please," she was saying. "I just need 5 minutes. I need to explain." "I don't think that's a good idea." Jake's voice was firm but not unkind. "Lisa?" I called out, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel as I walked to the front door. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. This wasn't the polished, put-together woman who had been my best friend for 10 years. This was someone who had been eaten alive by guilt and regret. "Sarah," she breathed, relief flooding her features. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." I know. I'd been ignoring her calls and texts, not ready to deal with her attempts at explanation or apology. "What do you want, Lisa?" "I want to explain. I want you to understand how this happened, how I let it get so out of control." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had been closer to me than a sister, who had shared my secrets and celebrated my victories and held me through my failures, the woman who had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. "Okay," I said finally. 5 minutes. Jake squeezed my shoulder supportively and disappeared into the kitchen, giving us privacy but staying close enough to intervene if needed. I led Lisa to the living room and gestured for her to sit on the couch while I took the chair across from her. "I never meant for this to happen," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "You have to believe me, Sarah. I never set out to hurt you. But you did hurt me," I said calmly. "Intentions don't matter when the result is the same." I know, and I hate myself for it. I've hated myself every single day since it started. Then why didn't you stop?" The question had been haunting me for weeks. If you knew it was wrong, if you knew it would hurt me, why didn't you just end it? Lisa was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Because I was lonely, Sarah. I've been so fucking lonely for so long, and Mark made me feel wanted. He made me feel special. For the first time in years, someone was choosing me. Someone was excited to see me. And I got addicted to that feeling. I felt a pang of sympathy despite myself. I knew what it was like to feel unseen, unwanted. I'd felt that way in my marriage for years. But that doesn't excuse what you did," I said. "That doesn't excuse the lying, the sneaking around, the way you looked me in the eye and pretended to be my friend while you were sleeping with my husband." "I know," Lisa said miserably. "I know it doesn't excuse anything. I just need you to know that I never stopped caring about you. Even while I was betraying you, I still loved you like a sister. That makes it worse, not better," I pointed out. "If you loved me, you should have stayed away from my husband. If you loved me, you should have told me what was happening instead of letting me blame myself for the problems in my marriage." Lisa flinched like I'd hit her. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I was a coward and a terrible friend, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking for it anyway because I can't stand the thought of losing you forever." I studied her face, taking in the genuine anguish there, the desperate hope. A month ago, her pain would have mattered to me. A month ago, I would have been tempted to find a way to forgive her, to salvage our friendship somehow. But that was before I'd learned what real loyalty looked like. Before I'd experienced what it felt like to be with someone who would never betray me, who valued our relationship too much to risk it for momentary gratification. "I can't forgive you, Lisa," I said quietly. "Not because I don't understand how it happened, but because I don't trust you anymore. And without trust, there's no foundation for friendship." Her face crumpled completely then, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "Mark won't see me anymore, you hate me, our whole friend group has turned against me. I've lost everything, and for what? For a few months of feeling wanted? You made your choices," I said, not without compassion but without compromise either. "Just like I'm making mine." She looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. "You're different," she said. "Harder. I don't recognize you anymore." "Good," I replied. "The person you recognized was naive enough to trust people who didn't deserve it. The person you recognized let herself be taken advantage of and made excuses for other people's bad behavior. This version of me knows what she's worth." Lisa was quiet for a moment, seeming to absorb this. When she spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. "Are you happy?" she asked. "With Jake, I mean. Are you actually happy, or is this just revenge?" It was a fair question, one that I'd been asking myself as well. "I'm happy," I said honestly. "Happier than I've been in years. Jake sees me in a way that Mark never did. He values me in a way that Mark never could. So this isn't just about getting back at Mark?" "It started that way," I admitted. "But it became something real very quickly. What Jake and I have, it's not perfect and it's complicated as hell, but it's honest. We chose each other with full knowledge of what it would cost." Lisa nodded slowly, as if she was finally beginning to understand. "I hope you'll be happy," she said, and I could hear that she meant it. "I hope he treats you the way you deserve to be treated." "He does." She stood up then, smoothing down her wrinkled skirt. "I should go. Thank you for seeing me. I know I didn't deserve even these 5 minutes." I walked her to the door, feeling oddly sad about the finality of it. Whatever else Lisa had been, she'd been a huge part of my life for a decade. Closing that door permanently felt like losing a piece of myself. "Lisa," I called out as she reached for the handle. She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes. "I hope you figure out why you need other people's attention so badly that you'd destroy the relationships that matter most," I said. "I hope you learn to value yourself enough that you don't need to take things that belong to other people." Her face crumpled again, but she nodded. "Me too." she whispered, and then she was gone. Jake emerged from the kitchen as soon as the door closed, pulling me into his arms without saying a word. He held me while I processed the encounter, the strange mixture of closure and sadness that came with definitively ending a relationship that had once meant everything to me. "How do you feel?" he asked finally. "Free," I said, and realized I meant it. "For the first time in months, I feel completely free." The divorce was finalized on a rainy Thursday in October, exactly 6 months after I'd caught Mark with Lisa. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office while Jake waited in the hallway, too respectful of the process to intrude, but too devoted to let me face it alone. When it was done, when the marriage was officially dissolved and I was legally single again, I walked out to find Jake pacing nervously by the windows. "It's done," I told him, holding up the papers. His relief was palpable. "How do you feel?" "Like I can finally breathe again." We went out to dinner that night to celebrate, not the end of my marriage, but the beginning of our life together without the shadow of deception hanging over us. We could finally be together openly, honestly, without having to sneak around or feel guilty about our happiness. "I have something for you," Jake said as we were finishing dessert. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it on the table between us. My heart stopped. "Jake," I whispered, staring at the box like it might explode. "Before you panic," he said quickly, "it's not what you think." "Well, it is what you think, but not yet." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, not an engagement ring, but a promise ring, a symbol of commitment without the pressure of marriage. "I know it's too soon for engagement," he said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "I know you're barely divorced, and I know this whole situation is complicated, but I want you to know that I'm serious about us, Sarah. I want you to know that this isn't just some rebound relationship or elaborate revenge fantasy. I love you," he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "I love your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. I love the way you challenge me, the way you make me want to be better. I love who you are when you're with me, and I love who I am when I'm with you. I know we can't get married right away. I know we need time to build something that's just ours, separate from all the drama and baggage. But I want you to know that I'm all in. I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere." I stared at the ring, then at Jake's earnest face, and felt something shift inside me. The last piece of my old life, the last shadow of doubt, finally fell away. "Put it on me," I said softly. Jake's smile was brighter than the restaurant's chandeliers. He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto my right hand, not the traditional engagement finger, but a promise of what might come. "I love you too," I told him, admiring the way the ring caught the light. "I love you for seeing me when I was invisible. I love you for wanting me when I felt unwanted. I love you for being brave enough to choose love over family loyalty. I love you for giving me permission to be myself." We held hands across the table while the candles burned low and the restaurant emptied around us. Two people who had found each other in the wreckage of my old life and built something beautiful from the ashes. A year later, we were married in a small ceremony on a beach in California, far away from the drama and complications of our respective families. It wasn't the big white wedding I'd had with Mark, full of tradition and obligation and other people's expectations. It was intimate, personal, honest, a reflection of who we'd become together. Mark didn't come, of course. We hadn't spoken since the night I'd left him, though I'd heard through mutual friends that he was dating someone new, a woman from his office who was apparently nothing like Lisa or me. I hoped he was happy. I hoped he'd learned something from the explosion of our marriage. But mostly I just hoped he'd found peace. Jake's parents came to the wedding, having eventually made their peace with our relationship. It had taken time, and there were still moments of awkwardness, but they'd come to see that their son was genuinely happy, that we were good together in a way that transcended the messy circumstances of how we'd gotten together. My parents were there too, finally understanding that this wasn't some impulsive rebound, but a real, lasting love. They'd grown to adore Jake over the months we'd been together, seeing how he treated me with the respect and devotion they'd always wanted for their daughter. As we exchanged vows on that beach, with the sun setting behind us and the waves lapping at our feet, I thought about the journey that had brought us to that moment. The betrayal that had shattered my world, but also freed me from a life that was slowly suffocating me. The revenge that had turned into something real and lasting. The choices that had seemed so risky at the time, but had led me to a happiness I'd never imagined possible. I promise to love you for who you are, not who I think you should be, I said to Jake as we stood facing each other with the ocean as our witness. I promise to choose you every day, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. I promise to build a life with you that's based on honesty, respect, and genuine partnership. I promise to love you for who you are, not despite your flaws, but because of your whole, complex, beautiful self, Jake replied, his voice thick with emotion. I promise to see you, to value you, to make sure you never doubt your worth again. I promise to be brave enough to love you completely, even knowing how much it would hurt to lose you. When we kissed to seal our vows, I tasted salt spray and possibility, new beginnings and hard-won wisdom. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not the desperate need to be completed by another person, but the joy of choosing to build something together as two whole, independent individuals. Later, at our reception dinner with just 20 of our closest friends and family members, Jake's best man gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. I've known Jake for 15 years, he said, raising his glass, and I've never seen him as happy as he's been since Sarah came into his life. Not just happy, but settled in a way that has nothing to do with settling for less. They challenge each other, they support each other, they make each other laugh. They're the kind of couple that makes you believe in love even when your own relationships are falling apart. He paused, looking directly at us. Sarah, thank you for showing Jake what real partnership looks like. Jake, thank you for showing Sarah what it means to be treasured. You two deserve all the happiness in the world. As our friends and family raised their glasses in celebration, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for finding love, but for having the courage to claim it. For being brave enough to burn down a life that wasn't serving me and build something better from the ashes. The woman who had caught her husband cheating and planned elaborate revenge felt like a different person now, someone I'd once been but had outgrown. I was still strong, still unwilling to settle for less than I deserved, but the hardness that had carried me through those dark months had softened into something more sustainable. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply, sustainably happy in a way I hadn't known was possible. That night, in our hotel room overlooking the Pacific, Jake and I made love as husband and wife for the first time. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the windows, he traced patterns on my bare shoulder with his fingertip. Any regrets? He asked softly. I thought about it seriously, giving myself permission to acknowledge any shadows or doubts. Did I regret the pain my choices had caused? Yes. Did I regret the way I'd handled things with Lisa and Mark? In some ways. Did I regret the person I'd had to become to fight for my own happiness? No, I said finally. No regrets. Good. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head. Because I plan to spend the next 50 years making sure you never have any. I fell asleep in his arms, thinking about second chances and new beginnings, about the unexpected ways life can reshape itself when you're brave enough to let it, about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. 6 months into our marriage, I got a call that I'd been both expecting and dreading. Mark was getting married, to the woman from his office, the rebound relationship that had apparently turned serious. The wedding was going to be small, family only, but Jake's parents thought we should know. I felt oddly detached from the news, like it was happening to people I used to know rather than people who had once been central to my life. I was happy for Mark, genuinely happy that he'd found someone who could love him the way he needed to be loved. I hoped he'd learned from our mistakes, that he wouldn't repeat the patterns that had destroyed our marriage. How do you feel about it? Jake asked when I told him. Relieved, I said, surprising myself with the honesty of it. It feels like the final piece of that chapter closing. He's moved on, I've moved on, we can both just be happy now. Jake nodded, understanding without needing explanation. He'd been worried, I knew, that some part of me was still tied to Mark, still invested in his happiness or devastation. But that had never been what this was about, not really. It had been about refusing to accept less than I deserved. It had been about having the courage to demand better, even when that meant burning down everything I'd built and starting over. It had been about choosing love over safety, passion over predictability, authentic connection over comfortable mediocrity. A year later, Jake and I bought a house together, not the suburban tract home that Mark and I had shared, but a restored Victorian in the Arts District downtown. It was quirky and challenging and full of character, just like our relationship. We spent weekends refinishing hardwood floors and painting walls in bold colors that reflected our personalities rather than some magazine's idea of good taste. I started my own consulting business, finally taking the leap that Mark had always been too scared to support. Jake was my biggest cheerleader, celebrating every new client and commiserating over every setback. He believed in my capabilities in a way that made me believe in them too. We traveled together, taking spontaneous weekend trips and carefully planned international adventures. We hosted dinner parties where the conversation was stimulating and the laughter was genuine. We built a life that was uniquely ours, shaped by our individual dreams and our shared values. And sometimes, late at night when we were curled up together reading or watching old movies, I would think about the woman I used to be. The woman who had settled for a marriage that looked good on paper but felt hollow inside. The woman who had been so hungry for approval that she'd sacrificed pieces of herself to keep the peace. I felt compassion for her, that woman I used to be. She'd been doing the best she could with the tools she had at the time, but I was grateful that she'd found the strength to demand more when it mattered most. Grateful that she'd been brave enough to burn it all down rather than continue living a half-life. 3 years after our wedding, Jake and I had our first child, a daughter we named Grace, after the undeserved gift that had brought us together. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt the final piece of my transformation click into place. I was no longer the woman who had been defined by her marriage, her betrayal, her revenge. I was no longer the woman who had needed another person's bad behavior to justify her own choices. I was simply Sarah, wife, mother, business owner, woman who had learned to love herself enough to demand love in return. "She's perfect," Jake whispered, stroking Grace's tiny hand with one finger. "She's ours," I replied, and in that word was everything: the family we'd chosen, the life we'd built, the love we'd fought for and won. Looking down at our daughter's sleeping face, I made her a silent promise. I promised that she would grow up seeing what real partnership looked like, what it meant to be valued and respected and cherished. I promised that she would never settle for less than she deserved, never apologize for taking up space, never shrink herself to make someone else comfortable. I promised that she would be brave enough to choose love, even when it meant starting over, even when it meant disappointing people, taking risks, facing criticism from those who preferred the safety of the status quo. Most importantly, I promised that she would know her own worth, not as someone's wife or daughter or employee, but as herself. Complete, complex, deserving of all the happiness she was brave enough to claim. As I sat there in the hospital room, holding my daughter while my husband dozed in the chair beside us, I thought about the long, winding road that had led to this moment. The betrayal that had felt like the end of the world, but had actually been the beginning of my real life. The revenge that had turned into redemption. The courage that had felt like destruction, but had actually been creation. I wouldn't change any of it. Not the pain, not the difficult choices, not the messy aftermath. Because all of it had been necessary to get me here, to this moment, to this life, to this version of myself that I finally, completely loved. The sun was setting outside the hospital window, painting the room in shades of gold and rose. In a few hours, we'd take Grace home to the house we'd made together, to the life we'd built from honesty and mutual respect, and the kind of love that makes you brave. It was more than I'd ever dared to dream of when I was married to Mark, more than I'd thought possible during those dark weeks when I was planning my revenge. It was the life I'd been meant to live all along, if I'd just been brave enough to claim it. And I was brave enough, finally, completely, unapologetically brave enough. As Grace stirred in my arms and Jake woke up to smile at his 2 favorite girls, I felt nothing but gratitude for the betrayal that had freed me, for the courage that had saved me, and for the love that had made it all worthwhile. This was my happy ending. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and honest and completely, utterly mine.